Hi, friends, and welcome to Oli Green. Goa is the land of beaches and parties. Goa is also exciting for the natural heritage that it possesses, the beautiful forests, the bustling wildlife, and the lesser known flora and fauna. Today, let us explore the wild Goa with the young ecologist Mr. Parag Rangnekar, who has explored the forests of Goa a lot. His work focuses on the documentation of the butterflies and dragonflies as well as conservation action through community participation. Parag has 15 research papers and various articles to his credit, including the description of two species new to the science. He is an expert member on the Goa State Biodiversity Board, Invertebrate Conservation Information Network for South Asia, and the founding president of Goa Conservation Network. He was also awarded the LEED Fellowship. He is also a champion of sustainable tourism, and his travel company Mrigya Expeditions conducts birding and wildlife tours throughout India. Welcome, Parag, to Uli Green.
Thank you, Abhi.
Before we do the wildlife trip, or rather the trip through the forest, let's try and understand how you got interested or passionate about this forests and wildlife.
Right. So, uh, I'm born and brought up in Goa, but my holidays, my native place is in Sawantwadi, in Amboli, where I spent much of my holidays. And I also come from a family of hunters, so that's my initiation into wildlife.
Okay.
But interestingly, somehow I don't know how, but I was never really keen in hunting, of course, and my father realized that. So then he got me Jim Corbett, Kenneth Anderson books, and slowly I was weaned off. So my dad is probably the main reason why I kind of, yeah,
Motivation for you to come into
yes,
the
yes,
field.
yes.
Okay.
And then of course met the right kind of people, made the right kind of friends, and slowly
Okay.
got involved. Yes.
Okay. Can you please throw a little bit of light on this exciting forests and wildlife of Goa? And also, why did you feel that it was important to put your efforts to document the ecosystem of the state? Because, I mean, as we have understood, the documentation of the forest and wildlife in Goa is not really well documented. So, what was it that got you interested in that?
Right. So I mean, I like to kind of speak about this, and I don't miss a chance in any forum to speak about this. Primarily because Goa, as everybody knows, is part of the Western Ghat complex, uh,
Okay.
but it's placed strategically. It's placed at the confluence of the northern and the southern Sahyadris, so which makes it unique. Because we have elements which represent the northern Western Ghats and the southern Western Ghats within our state. It's also the state where if you look at the profile, the altitude start dipping. So if you are in, say, let's say Mahabaleshwar in Maharashtra, the heights are like 1,000 meters above sea level, whereas as you come into Goa, the altitude starts dipping, and then it kind of goes up to Karwar, and then further at maybe Kudremukh, again they start rising. So the altitudes kind of dip here. Also, we are closest to the coast, within the entire Western Ghat region. So all this, and then of course the geology here changes. Because the geology changes, the flora changes, and then the associated fauna also changes. So Goa, is at the transition of the northern and the southern Sahyadris, which makes it very, very unique. And so elements, like I said, of northern Western Ghats are found here, and then elements of southern Western Ghats, their range starts from Goa. So all this makes Goa very, very interesting. And then the point that you mentioned, that historically, natural history, has not really been studied well. Goa was under the Portuguese, unlike the rest of the country, where the British did some amazing surveys, and came up with the fauna of British India, as everybody knows it. But Goa is like a gap. So it's where there's this, we know about the Palghat gap, right, down south,
Correct.
yeah, which has led to speciation. So the geographical position of Goa, also kind of, many of us refer to as the Goa Gap. So that also there is this is a dividing line for quite a few species, and then it's also a knowledge gap. That's another important point, that we do not know, or we do not have information on quite a few taxa within the state, and probably that's the reason prompted many of us, just not me, to delve into documentation of especially the lesser fauna.
But then, in your when I introduced you, I mentioned about the public participation also. How was that done?
So I think GBCN is a the Goa Bird Conservation Network is an excellent case study, where it was just a few of us who started it, handful of us rather, who started it, and then people from all walks of life have joined in, old people, youngsters, school going kids, and slowly the bird watching and the birding movement in Goa has really strengthened. So that's one group that we have good knowledge of, but I think that needs to spread to other taxa as well.
Can you talk about where you mentioned why it is different? Why that forest and wildlife is different? But then can you talk about a little bit about the wildlife of Goa? What all are the specific or rather unique species that you can find there?
Right. So I mean, we have quite a few endemic species, endemics for the Western Ghats, not specifically for Goa, but there are a few which which are worth a mention. One is, of course, a flower. It's a seasonal herb called Dipkadi goense. Now, this has not been found anywhere else other than Goa, so we can call it endemic to the state. And then there are a few. There are a couple of dragonflies that we describe new to science from Goa. Now, interestingly, both have been found in other states as well now, but again, I mean, quite a few species that have been described from Goa, a few Sicilians, a few frogs, which have been described from the state. So, that makes Goa quite interesting. And then, like I was saying earlier, there are some species whose range starts from here. Like, for example, the white-bellied tree pie or the Wayanad laughing thrush, which has been, which is reported from Goa, is not found north of it, right? So, then of course there's the hump-nosed pit viper, which of course has been sighted north of Goa, reported, but its proper distribution starts from Goa southwards. There are quite a few species like this, which are representative in that sense of Goa and the southern Western Ghats.
Now coming to your main passions like bird watching. I've seen in most of your interviews your passion such as bird watching with a special focus on dragonflies and butterflies. Also, you had included moths, frogs, leopards, snakes, and all in your total study. Can you throw a light on all of these? I mean, how do you handle it? How do you go about doing it, documenting it, watching it?
So I think like everybody else, I also started as a bird watcher. So probably that was the most obvious thing to do then, So, and of course, I still love birding. But, like I was saying earlier, our knowledge of birds in Goa is quite stabilized. We know, we have good information on birds and their distribution. So it was obviously, trying to look at other taxa. So then the second obvious choice was butterflies. Once that is stabilized, then you of course move to other taxa. And dragonflies, of course, there was a incident, I would say, when Dr. Andrew from Nagpur, from Islop College, he was in Goa for a family trip, and I happened to meet him, and he very casually asked me, do you know how many dragonflies are found in Goa? And I said, no idea. I have no idea, but I've got a lot of pictures. So he said, okay, I'll go back and I'll send you a paper on dragonflies of Goa. And he actually couriered that photocopy to me. And when we looked at it, we saw 22 species reported from Goa. I think the paper was published in 1991 of surveys which were done in the 60s, immediately after liberation. And then when we looked at our pictures, we realized we probably have more than 22 species, in our photographic record. So then a couple of us, me and Omkar, basically, decided to dedicate 1 year, looking at only dragonflies. So we went out, we started looking at them, photographing, and then of course there were not many, field guides then, except one PDF which was available, and so we started looking at that, and within a year, we ended up reporting 34 new records to the state.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay,
so
that's wonderful.
yes, and then of course now the count of dragonflies, odonets in Goa is around 108, including
Okay.
those two new species to sign. So that has been the journey, of taking pictures and trying to
Does it
identify.
does it by any chance is connected to the season, the climate, the what you see, and is it connected to the climate?
Yeah, of course, of course, of course. I mean, odonets are quite seasonal in their appearance. Adult odonets.
Okay.
Also because they are dependent on water for their life cycle, completion of their life cycle. So the best time to see dragonflies is in monsoons and post monsoons. There are certain species which you will find only during that period. Then
Okay.
winter there is a little bit of a lull. The diversity kind of goes down, and then just before monsoons, pre-monsoon, again you will see certain species which again you will probably not see throughout the year. So they'll emerge pre-monsoon, breed, and then they are in their aquatic stage, and they'll emerge again the next year. So they
But
are they're very
by watching this and studying this, is there any impact on the climate that you study?
uh, frankly very anecdotal kind of observations, but
Okay.
we haven't really reached there, because I think the first step is to document what we have, and
Okay.
then look at ecological and other parameters. So South India, for example, has 200 species, 200 odd
Okay.
species, and our count is 108. So I'm sure there's a lot of more work to do, as far as stabilizing what we know, in the first place.
Okay.
Yeah.
But then, is there an inflow of tourists for this also now to do? Because Goa always for us is like the beaches. But
Yes.
is there an inflow of tourists for this also now?
Interest is growing. Interest
Okay.
interest is growing, but not as much as we would want to, because the primary focus still remains birds and bird watching.
Okay.
There are a few who are interested in butterflies and other life forms, but the tourism, commercial tourism, is focused on birds at the moment, and we are hoping and trying that narrative changes. People, of course, reptile amphibians is another aspect, especially in monsoons, where you get a lot of people coming to see, observe, and photograph reptiles and amphibians. Yeah.
These forests are closer to the tourist centers.
Looking at, I mean, if you look at the typical tourist, sector in Goa, which is primarily restricted to the coast,
Okay.
not much. Most of our exploration areas are in the interiors, but then of course there are birding hotspots on the coast as well.
Okay.
Most of our beaches, play host to quite a few migratory, waders and seagulls, terns. Many of the tidal mud flats, get a lot of interesting species, migratory species. So as the tourism, season, which is restricted kind of to the winter months, we get an inflow of avian tourists as well.
But this is the time for migratory birds, right?
Yes,
October, November,
absolutely.
December.
Yes.
Okay. And you have a lot of migratory birds coming to Goa.
Absolutely, quite a few. Yes.
Okay. Okay. And coming to your take on the what do you call as sustainable or ecotourism, and your activity, your venture specifically, can you give us a little insight on that?
Right. So, I mean, ecotourism, I guess, is a word which is very loosely used, frankly.
Correct, exactly.
Ecotourism, sustainable tourism, and all those basically adjectives and jargons. We prefer calling ourselves, responsible, tourism operators,
Okay.
because I think that's easier in a way. We can be responsible in so many ways.
Okay.
Primarily, I think our focus has been, while doing whatever we do, in terms of commercial tourism, to see that there is enough local stake. Try and see that local communities benefit out of whatever we do. I think that has been our primary focus. And that's one of the reasons why wherever we work, we try and involve the local communities in part of our trips, part of our expeditions. So that has been our primary focus. Uh, Also, when you call yourself responsible, you need to be responsible on so many fronts. Uh, for example, as a simple thing like taking care of the waste that is generated, is
Correct.
also being responsible. Secondly, practicing ethical behavior on the field
Okay.
is something that is very very important. So from that point of view, that's the reason why I use the word responsible more than sustainable or any other. But yeah.
What does Mrigaya Expedition do?
Right. So we are a partnership firm. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, four partners, and primarily focus on three verticals. One is nature and wildlife. Where we conduct bird watching, wildlife trips. Primary focus of course is Goa, but then of course we conduct trips. All over the country. Again, with focus on Maharashtra, Karnataka, and then of course Western Himalayas and the Northeast. The
Okay.
second vertical, focuses on educational institutes, and so education is a very strong, factor in what we do. Another angle of being responsible,
Okay.
ensuring that whoever you cater to, whoever your guest is, whoever your client is, goes back with a positive, experience, goes back with a little bit of more knowledge than what he already had. So I think
Okay.
that's another angle. And in the educational front, we focus primarily on educational institutes. So
Okay.
there are quite a few schools and colleges which want outdoor experiences. So we curate those experiences for them. And of course, since our expertise primarily is again nature wildlife, we build in a lot of the nature wildlife angle into that experience. And then the third vertical is the community tourism part. So we have set up two examples. I mean, there are two models in Goa. One which is Goa's first tourism cooperative.
Okay.
This is yes. So this is in a village called Verle, and the project is named Angan. This is Goa's first tourism cooperative. And the second one is Jungle Trails Homestay, which is in the proximity of the Bhagwan Mahavir Wildlife Sanctuary, which is operated by a women self-help group, 14 women
Oh.
who
Okay.
who manage the homestay. So we act as facilitators. We act like we basically help them market their product, and
Okay.
and that's more again the responsible angle comes into uh, picture here, because these two projects are not really the commercial arm of Mrugaya. Uh,
Oh, okay.
through these two projects, we basically want to give back to the community, which has been living in these areas and has been conserving the resources there for so many hundreds of years. So we don't really earn commercially out of this, but that's our way of uh, giving
Giving
back.
it back to the nature or society.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
We were talking about butterfly study on butterflies. These days, butterfly gardens are becoming a fad. What is your take on that? Because
Yeah.
that again, if you when you say that you have to go to the forest to see that, now people are bringing that same butterfly to our gardens. So how do you rate that?
So I don't like to call it a garden in the first place, because garden is something which is uh, uh, curated. Uh,
Artificial.
yes, artificial. So
Okay.
what I mean, it's a good thing that people are getting involved in creating butterfly gardens or whatever. I mean, I prefer calling it a habitat, butterfly
Okay.
habitat, because what you need to create is space for butterflies which are already there. So I think the primary objective of a butterfly garden is to you know cater to butterflies which are there in your surrounding, not really try and get some exotic species from somewhere else. Uh,
Okay.
so so the anybody who's planning a butterfly garden, the first thing he or she has to do is to document what butterflies are found in your surrounding, and then accordingly create the habitat for them. So this fad of probably trying to get some exotic species from the ghats into your urban gardens is not the way to go.
Okay, what you're trying to say is it has to be natural plants and natural native butterflies,
Absolutely, absolutely,
both
absolutely,
native. Okay,
absolutely. I mean, we do also don't recommend enclosures, for butterflies, because that's again, of course, there are legal implications. At the same time, if you have a clothes structure, then the butterflies inside, probably tend to die.
okay,
So ideally, what you need is an open garden, which has host plants and food plants, a mix of both. So
okay,
butterflies get attracted because of the food plants or nectar sources, and then because there are host plants, they breed there as well. So, and then, it's just not about the host plants and the food plants, but you need to create shelter belts also.
okay,
When there are strong winds, or if there is heavy rains, or if there's if the sun is too harsh, you need areas where the butterfly can rest, or it can hide. So it has to be habitat. A butterfly garden or a butterfly habitat with a lawn is not really a butterfly habitat. What we need is as much weed growth as possible. It shouldn't be looking nice and curated. A butterfly garden, ideally, yes.
okay. I think in one of your interviews you had mentioned about butterflies not just feeding on flowers, it also feeds on decomposed material.
Yes. Quite a few. I mean, there are quite a few butterflies which come to anything that is fermented fruits maybe, uh, and then there is another group which comes to anything which is foul smelling. Including animal dung, human feces, for example. They'll come on anything, cow dung. So there is an entire group which will never come to flowers. Which will come to
Okay.
anything that is decomposing. Uh, so
But
yeah,
again, these are found everywhere. All these varieties are found everywhere, or is it native to?
No, so there are a few which we call generalists, which are found in
Okay,
all kinds of habitats, and
okay,
then there are specialists, which will be found only in forested areas, or within forests they'll be found only along riparian patches, that is, riverbeds or streams. So yeah, so there are specialists and there are generalists. So our butterfly garden primarily, has to cater to what is there in your surrounding. And
okay,
maybe in an urban setup, it will be mostly generalists whom we are targeting. And then when
okay,
we are doing that, when if you have created a butterfly habitat, then we have to remember that it's not only for butterflies, but there will be other elements which will come in. There'll be spiders coming in. There will be lizards coming in, and behind them there will be, probably, if you create a small water body, there'll be frogs, there'll be dragonflies. Birds will come in. Snakes will come in. So I think when you're creating a habitat for butterflies, you are actually creating a habitat for all the different groups, and you got to entertain them as well. It's not
okay,
only for
okay.
butterflies, and you don't drive away or clean off the spider webs because they trap butterflies. So I think that's not the way to go.
And you were in one of your interviews. You had mentioned now also that dragonflies, their life cycle is closer to a water body.
Yeah.
How is
So
that?
people are fascinated with the butterfly life cycle, from a caterpillar to
Okay,
a beautiful butterfly. But I find the dragonfly transformation much
okay,
more dramatic, because dragonflies lay eggs in water. Their
okay,
nymphal stage, the young ones are actually they live in water, they feed in water, they are predators within water as well. And when they emerge as adults, they are again winged predators. Okay, so
okay,
this transformation from watery kind of a board to the sky is much more dramatic than probably a transformation that a butterfly undergoes. So yeah,
okay,
they're completely dependent on water. All dragonflies. It may be shallow pools, it may be deeper waters, or flowing streams. You will find dragonflies wherever there's water, fresh water primarily.
okay. So it is. There's a lot to study in this butterflies and dragonflies. Is what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, for that matter, very few. I mean, we don't know much about our the breeding biology of a dragonfly, their life cycles, for example.
Okay,
As nymphs, as young ones, how much time do they spend in water? What do they do there? What do they feed on? What kind of substrate they require? We do not have knowledge of much of our species. I
okay,
think everybody is focused on documentation, probably because that's the easier thing to do. I think ecological studies are very, very important because you may know what species you have in your area, but you don't know what it needs. What kind of
Okay.
uh, what 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 defines where it lays eggs, whether it is the water temperature, whether it is the turbidity in the water, so many factors. I think because they are water dependent makes them much more sensitive to changes in water. So I think ecological studies, especially on dragonflies, is of crucial importance from various points of view, also because they are indicator species. Any change in the quality of water will have an impact on the diversity of dragonflies, direct impact.
Oh,
And
okay.
just the presence and absence of a species uh, can tell you that something's going wrong with your water body. And of course then the further investigations, chemical investigations, can happen later. um,
Okay.
just by looking at a species you can say that okay, your quality is good or bad. So from that point of view, ecological studies on dragonflies becomes very, very crucial.
Okay. It is Invertebrate Conservation Information Network. What exactly that organization
This is
doing?
basically a association of people who are interested in invertebrate studies, which
Okay.
includes not, I mean, insects and other arthropods, spiders and stuff. So it's basically a association of people who are
Okay.
and they're spread all over, basically of in Southeast Asia, not just India,
Okay.
other countries as well. And this, it gives you a platform where you can communicate and interact with like-minded people, share your expertise, gain knowledge from other people. So yeah, that's what the forum is all about.
Okay. And what about the Goa State Biodiversity Board? What
So
is your role
yeah, so
in that?
you're right. So I'm a member for the last 2 terms on the Goa State Biodiversity Board. Now this is a statutory body under the
Okay.
Biological Diversity Act, and so the primary objective of the board is looking at uh, right now what we are doing is trying to form uh, the biodiversity management committees in most of our panchayats and municipal councils, which has already been done,
Okay.
and the compilation of people's biodiversity registers, which
Okay.
is probably, I think, for the state of Goa, the first institutional effort to document biodiversity in the state. All the documentation that has happened earlier, has been sporadic efforts by individuals or by some institution somewhere. I think the compilation of PBRs across the state through the Biodiversity Board, I think, is the first institutional effort,
Okay.
towards documenting all the, not only the wild diversity but domesticated as well.
Okay. Okay. That's good. I mean, if we really look at it today, youngsters are getting into this trekking initially more on a fitness regime mode, but then also on the fact that they want to switch off from everything and get closer to the nature. There are a lot of youngsters coming into that field now. I mean, what will be a message for people who are interested about nature, interested about trekking, getting into forest? What will be your message for them?
Uh, uh, See, I mean, connecting with nature, I think everybody likes to do, in various forms. Uh, but then, why do we do that? I mean, because it gives you probably the peace of mind. Kind of, it's like a booster dose, before the
Okay.
next week starts. But then, what are we doing for nature is, I think, the question that needs to be asked. And I think there's enough awareness out there, for the need to conserve, to reduce our carbon footprint, to reduce waste, and all the environmental jargon that we know of. I think my message would be, enough of talks and enough of social media outrage. I think it's time for action, and action obviously starts at home. So, and everybody probably needs to introspect and look at how we live our lives. I think with the kind of population that we have, uh, smaller efforts here and there really not going to make difference until everybody steps up and acts. But I think it's time for action now. Only talks and discussions are not really going to take us anywhere. simple things like, asking where your food comes from, the whole concept of food mile also, if everybody starts asking this question and ensuring that, you source local, I think also will have a much, kind of a multiplier effect. So I think it's time to act is my message for everybody.
That is in terms of individually what we all can do, what we all can contribute to get a uh, greener world for our future
But-
generations. But then on a trekking trip, what is it that we need to be aware about, and what will be your
Oh, you mean to say,
that?
okay, I mean,
Yeah, the other one
talking
is
of the,
on a personal level, how we can all contribute.
yes, okay, I understand. So what you're asking me is basically, how do you behave when you're out there, right? That's what
Correct. Yeah,
Achha.
that's right.
Uh,
I think there are
various
a lot of etiquette
Various-
when you do.
various
trekking.
things that, yes, various things. I mean, I think the first thing that you need to do is understand and appreciate, and respect the place that you're visiting. It's not some picnic spot. Please understand that. When you go there, not only where you're trekking. For example, keeping to uh, traded paths is a simple thing that you can do. The more footfalls outside the traded path, is going to impact, small things. You don't realize it. But yeah, so, respect for the land and its denizens, flora, fauna, both, I think is the most primary thing, wherever you're visiting. Things like, I mean, these are simple things. Everybody knows, that you shouldn't be littering, you shouldn't be plucking, flowers, you shouldn't be breaking twigs, I mean, there are quite a few things that I can mention, but I think all that stems from respect. Respect for that place and its denizens, I think, is primary. Without that, you're going to probably not, you won't be mindful of, what you have to do and how you have to behave.
So what I understand from that is, when you get into the forest, you are an intruder. It is their land, and you need to
Absolutely.
respect that and give that.
Absolutely. And behave like a guest.
Okay, perfect. I think we'll stop with that. Thanks a lot, Parag, for that wonderful explanation of one, the beautiful Goa, and second, how to be responsible from our side, and third, how to be a responsible trekking person.
Sure,
Thanks a lot for that.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.